And welcome back to the All CEUs live interactive presentations. I have a couple housekeeping things that I want to take care of before we get started. One is to remind you that you can get CEUs for this. The live interactive CEUs you'll get 1 hour of CEU credit for it. This class would also count in most states toward addiction counselor pre-certification training. So if you need those hours, great. If you don't, I'm just happy that you're here with us today. The next thing I wanted to bring up is this book that I've had in my treasure trove of library things forever and ever. It's actually not even in print anymore to the best of my knowledge. It was written back in 1975. It's called Writing Behavioral Contracts, A Case Simulation and Practice Manual by William DeRisi and George Butz. You can find it on Amazon for anywhere from, it's like 89 cents plus shipping, so like $5. It is my go-to manual when I teach treatment planning. So if you're having difficulty learning how to write treatment plans or teaching your staff how to write treatment plans, this is an awesome book. I will warn you, some of the language is a bit outdated, but once you get past that, overall the activities are super. I'm sure you can find it at Better World Books and other places too, but it's a little bit hard to find. It doesn't come up in search is real easy, but it is a fabulous book. Okay, so on to one of my favorite topics, behavior modification. We're going to do kind of an overview today and see how people are feeling about that. And if you want me to break it down more next week and really walk you through treatment planning, we can do that. So that's one of those questions that I'll ask you towards the end of the class. All right, so moving on. I am Dr. Donna Lee Snipes. I am with allceus.com, and we will be presenting today to counselors and people who want to be counselors, or just people who have kids like mine who every once in a while need to have their behavior shaped. Okay. So, again, in order to get credit for the live interactive, we need to have your name and email address. We will email you after the class is over with the password that you can use to log in to take the quiz if you decide to purchase CEUs. Watching is always free. The CEUs just cost a little bit to help cover the cost of all the technical stuff that we have to go through to put this together. Okay. And just for those of you who are wondering, your name and email address will not go out to the general public, so don't feel like you're letting everybody know your business. Okay, the next question, putting in your email address. Please do that. We cannot send you the password to the quiz if we don't have your email address. If you are in one of those states that requires participation to be live interactive, like a workshop or a face-to-face thing, you will have to participate in the polls. So just kind of throwing that out there. Moving on. Today, this is the fun part. We're going to learn how to define target behaviors. We're going to define discriminative stimuli, reinforcement, punishment, reinforcement schedules, chaining, behavior strain, extinction bursts, and extinction. And we're going to practice applying these terms to different behaviors. One of the things I see a lot is people having difficulty really effectively using their language to define behaviors in a way that's meaningful to both the clinician and the client, or the parent and the child. So we're going to talk a lot about that. And then we're going to identify ways to effectively apply punishment and reinforcement in order to modify behavior. So throughout this course, we're going to talk about Polly the Pigeon. She was the pigeon that, I spent an entire semester teaching her how to hokey pokey. And the furthest we got was putting her right wing in and put her right wing out, put her right wing in and flap it all about. Yeah, so your college tuition at work. We're also going to talk about self-injurious behaviors. And I lumped those together. It can be anything from cutting, which is what we normally think of, to more slow, long-term things like smoking, drinking, binge eating, purging, etc. We're also going to look at parenting issues. So if you have a parent that comes to you who's having a child that's having some behavior difficulties, how to help them modify that child's behavior. And guess what? Part of it goes into modifying the parent's behavior. But, we don't throw that out there right away, because if they want to focus on the identified patient, then we will. So basic definitions. Behavior has to be observable. If I can't see it, I can't fix it. If I go up to somebody and say, Johnny, you need to be nicer. What does nice look like? The definition of nice may be very different for 3 different people. So it's not observable. I want to be happier. I want to be less stressed. Those are all great goals. But we have to know what they look like so we know when we've achieved the goal. It has to be measurable some way, okay? Frequency, how often it occurs. Intensity, how much. So if somebody drinks and they don't drink very often, maybe twice a month, but when they drink a 24-pack. The 24-pack is your intensity. The frequency is twice a month. Duration, yeah, I know some of you are going, they can drink a 24-pack twice a month, they're probably not holding their liquor very well. Or, they're getting really, really, really drunk. I digress, squirrel. Duration, how long? Working out. Let's talk about cardio. Cardio is one of those things that we talk about, all of these things. How many times a week do you work out? How hard do you work out? Are you working in your target training zone? And when you work out, how long do you work out? 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour and a half? Those are our base measures. Now, some things are a little bit more loosey-goosey, and so you can measure them on a Likert scale. I really suggest you try to identify some observable, measurable behaviors. That gives you something much more concrete to grasp onto. Think about if you've ever had a child or a pet, and over time, they grow up, right? But if you're there day after day after day, you don't really notice it till one day you walk in and you're like, oh my gosh, you're not a little boy anymore. Oh. Maybe that's just me. Anyhow, the Likert scale is somebody rating their own depression, anxiety, what have you, on a scale of 1 to 10. While that's good, you may not really notice those subtle changes if you are sort of living it every day. So if you can say depression or reduction of depression is evidenced by sleeping no more than 8 hours, by getting out of bed by 9 in the morning at least 5 days a week. Those are things that are observable and measurable. And goals need to be time limited, especially for clients in early recovery. If we say, you can't drink anymore, they look at you like, Time limited. Let's look at not drinking for the rest of today, not drinking for the rest of this week. Don't set people up for failure. If you make goals that are too long, you're going to set them up for failure. Think about the last New Year's resolution you made. You said, maybe, I want to lose 50 pounds. Great, that's awesome. That's wonderful for your health. But that's a huge goal, and the reward is going to be way away. And the chances people make it to losing 50 pounds in their first shot aren't necessarily wonderful if they don't have reinforcers placed periodically throughout that. So let's look at, I'm going to lose 2 pounds a week. That's realistic. It's time limited, and it's measurable. So those are the things that we can look at for weight loss. Yes, over 25 weeks you can lose 50 pounds, and that's fabulous. But we're going to talk about behavior strain later. And if you're working and working and working and working and there's like no reward, you lose some of that motivation. So let's move on so I don't run out of my entire hour. So Polly the Pigeon, we wanted her to hokey pokey, which That's hard enough to teach a child, let alone a pigeon. We identified the behavior that we wanted her to do. We wanted her to put her right wing in and put her right wing out. That's two different behaviors. So we started out with getting her to put her right wing in pretty much on cue. So she would get into the little Skinner box, they'd shut the door, we'd give her a treat, and that started the chain of events. She said, oh, okay, treats are here, it's time to perform. She'd eat her treat. Eventually, after a whole semester, she'd eat her treat and she'd put her right wing in. All right, the asterisks, when you see those, are questions I'm going to have for you. So we're just going to skip down to a child's behavior. And we're going to give the example of having a child clean up the kitchen. Now, whether it's a child or your spouse or your roommate, that definition varies really widely about what a clean kitchen looks like. So just saying, I want you to clean the kitchen, well, some people will say, is that observable? You can look at it and say it's clean. Yeah, but your definition of clean and mine may be very different. So we need to very closely operationalize our definitions so people know what standards. And this is the same thing that we face at work. If you are a supervisor and you're working with someone and you ask them to do something and they don't do it correctly or completely, go back and ask yourself, was I vague? Does this person really know what goes into, I need this chart completed? Some people may look and go, yeah, all the progress notes are there, here you go. But there's way more that needs to go into a complete chart than progress notes. So we need to have, at our facility, we have an audit sheet. And it specifies what needs to be in there, how often treatment plans need to show that they were updated, etc. That frequency, duration, yada, yada. So, the child's behavior is cleaning up the kitchen, Polly's doing a dance. So, another activity or idea, behavior we might look at is a client who wants to stop smoking. That is not unusual to hear. So if a client wants to stop smoking, how do you define that behavior? And let me just throw in a little caveat there. What if they say, I don't want to stop cold turkey? I want to stop smoking, but I can't envision myself going from 3 packs a day to zilch overnight. Okay, so maybe right now they go out and smoke after every meal. All right, we're going to talk about discriminative stimuli later, and that's a great lead in. So there's 3 meals in a day at minimum, assuming we're not smoking after snacks. So we can say, I want to cut down until I am only smoking 1 cigarette after dinner or lunch. Maybe work is more stressful and you know you can't give up that lunchtime cigarette. Smoking every morning when you get up. That's another one. It's a discriminative stimuli for a lot of people, and it's either stress or just the fact that they're awake. I know I get up in the morning and I stumble out of bed and I make coffee. I don't think, do I want coffee this morning? I stumble out of bed and I make coffee. It's just habit. It's something that I do. So those are 2 great ideas that we can look at. So maybe you can stop smoking when you get up and wait until right before you start your day at work. Putting something in there so you're not doing it just out of habit. All right, so we're going to move on. If a client comes in and says, Doc, I'm anxious. I am stressed out all the time. How do you define that so we know when he's not anxious anymore or stressed out? So we talked earlier, you could say Likert scale, but he's going to hopefully have very small progressive steps towards feeling better, and we want him to be able to identify those. So what small things might help us understand or help us identify when the client is less anxious? Okay, feeling fidgety, like you need a smoke to relax, biting your fingernails. Okay, so everybody like you're reading my mind. I'm a fidgety person. So knowing or reducing how much you fidget is one thing that you can look at. I'm one of those people, I took up crocheting because I have to have something to do with my hands. Constantly biting your fingernails. So constantly is kind of a vague word. So let's look at seeing if you can go a day without biting your fingernails. If they can make it a day for an entire week, then up the ante and say, let's see if you can go an entire week now, since we know you can do it if we're looking at it on a day-to-day basis. You may have to break it down even more than that. I bite my fingernails most often, because I'm not crocheting, when I'm in traffic. So looking at if there are certain places. If they eat when they're anxious, they eat to reduce their stress, or they drink to reduce their stress. We can say, well, when you're stressed out, what other things might you do? And we can say, how often does this happen? If you eat when you're depressed, number one, how often are you depressed? And number two, how often do you eat? Is this 3 times a week, 6 times a week, morning, noon, and night? What are we looking at? We need to have some sort of a number so we can chart it. That doesn't mean that they can't ever eat when they're depressed or stressed out. There is definitely something to be said for a pint of Ben & Jerry's. But if that's once a month, it's very different than once a day. So, reinforcement. And I put the little operational signs from math in front of them to remind you. Positive, add something good. So positive reinforcement is like getting your paycheck. For Polly, it was getting her food. Negative reinforcement takes away, subtracts, something bad. So, for example, if I tell my children, if you do your lessons all week and you get at least 80% on your end of week final exams, then you can take Friday off. Now that takes away something bad, a whole day of lessons they don't have to do. We have to look at what works for the particular person. Polly, positive reinforcement for her was food. For somebody who smokes, if they don't smoke, what could they do instead that would be rewarding? And if they make it to the end of the day without smoking, or make it to the end of their goal, whatever that is, a day, an hour, what kind of reward do they get? Sometimes when people are trying to lose weight, they will take the money that they would have spent on junk food and put it in a little jar, and then they can go shopping at the end of the week. Sometimes when people are trying to learn not to talk like a drunken sailor, you'll have a quarter jar, and every time you say a bad word, it's got to go in the quarter jar. Then you can use that money. We did that at a residential facility that I worked at. We had a quarter jar, and at the end of the month, there weren't a whole lot of women on the facility. At the end of the month, we would take the money that they had deposited in the quarter jar and have a pizza party. It wasn't huge, but it was something. At least they were feeling like they were getting something out of it. Anxiety. Positive reinforcement. Add something good. So if somebody is working really hard on reducing their anxiety, what could they do? Maybe take a bubble bath. Go on a hike. There are lots of things. Now, let's real quick look at what's maintaining the anxiety. Does anxiety add anything good? That's a trick question. And I think we'll get to that in a few minutes. The answer is, and if we don't, I'll get back to it. The answer is yes. Every behavior that's maintained is maintained through reinforcement. There is a benefit to it. We just have to figure out what it is for that person, and it could be different for different people. Chores, cleaning the kitchen. If you want your child to do their chores, you can either add something positive, like an allowance, or take away something negative, like maybe a day of chores, or something that they really don't like to do. What are some reinforcers involved in smoking? What maintains that behavior? Why does somebody smoke? And this is pretty easy. I don't smoke, and I know a lot of them. It gives you an energy burst. It helps you relax. It may give you something else to focus on. It gives you something to do with your hands. There we go, something to do with your hands. It gives you something to do. A lot of people, when they, something not to eat junk. You guys can read my mind today. That's where I was going. When a lot of people stop smoking, they replace that hand-to-mouth behavior with food, and so they start gaining weight. So smoking keeps their hands busy so they're not putting food in their mouth. It gives you something to do when anxious. A lot of people find that smoking can help calm them down. It helps them at least focus on something else. But nicotine, we know, does have a calming effect to some extent. Okay, so we need to look at all of these because we're not going to help them get rid of the behavior very well if we don't provide something for them to do that meets those same needs. If we say, okay, you can't smoke anymore, and that's what you do when you're anxious, then the person gets anxious and they're like, I'm going to crawl out of my skin. I got to do something. We're setting them up for failure. So we need to look at all the reasons they're doing what they're doing and find healthy alternatives or ways to deal with it. All right, here we go. What are some reinforcers involved in anxiety? Hint, then there's negative reinforcement. So when someone is anxious and they get themselves all worked up, part of that is a choice. We can feel our feelings without having to act on them. So some people may let their anxiety kick in order to get attention from a spouse or others. So that's providing something, that's positive reinforcement of that anxiety. When we get anxious, I want you to think back to Stress 101. We have the fight or flight reaction. So anxiety tells our body, or something happens, and we feel anxious, which is that flight response. Whatever's going on, the person feels stressed about, feels a threat. So anxiety generally invokes behaviors that protects them from that threat. It helps them get out of the situation. So one of the things that our clients have or come to have is generalization of that anxiety. So everything makes them anxious. And they tend to get anxious at this level when it only needs to be this level. So on the flip side of of reinforcement is punishment. Anything unpleasant or unwanted that reduces the likelihood that a behavior will occur. So when you punish a behavior, now we think back to the olden days, back when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and we talk about corporal punishment. I got a spanking once in my life, and I never got a spanking again. Now, not that I'm saying that spanking is the good thing to do, but what I am saying is punishment as we think of it. Positive punishment adds something unpleasant. You have to eat 2 helpings of spinach. I think my son would like roll over and go into convulsions if I made him eat 2 helpings of spinach. Negative punishment takes away something desired. And this is what we're used to now, timeout, grounding, taking away video games. Negative punishment works pretty well. You just have to figure out what's most rewarding to that particular person. If, I have 2 children, and one of them, if I took away his video games, I don't think he would know how to act. especially if I took it away for a long period of time, more than like a day or two. My other one, I don't think she could care less. So if I took away her computer, she'd be like, I'll go outside and play. Okay, so it would fall flat with her, not with him. So I have to look at her, and the sun rises and sets on her little dog. So if I say, you know what, I don't think that Raina can sleep with you for the next week, she'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. She's also motivated by how other people feel. She's very empathic. So when people are disappointed in her, that's excruciating. So that's positive punishment with her. If you're adding that, she knows that you're upset, and she cares about it. That's the clue, or the key. That's pretty much all you have to do is let her know you're disappointed or upset. I think I've had to do that maybe 2 times in her little life. And she's a preteen now, so finding what works to motivate the person, the animal, the child, your employees, whatever it is. So again, punishment and reinforcement can be both positive and negative. And I still have to go through that in my head when I'm trying to define them or whatever. Punishment reduces the likelihood that something's going to happen again. Reinforcement increases the likelihood. Schedules of reinforcement. Interval schedules are not behavior dependent. They are time dependent. So I could stand here and look at you for an entire hour, and at the end of the hour, the presentation would be over, regardless of whether anybody participated or I said boo. That's an interval. Another fixed interval is bills. We know that our electric bill is going to come once a month. And if it doesn't come once a month, we may, celebrate if, generally that means they just got lost in the mail or something. But if we got a month off, woohoo, that would be something to celebrate. That would be what? Negative reinforcement, because we're taking away a bill that I really don't like to pay anyway. Variable interval is rain. It doesn't matter if you do the best rain dance on the planet. It is only going to rain every so often. Maybe once a week, maybe once a month. We know generally we can anticipate based on the season how much it's going to rain. It rains all the time. When I first moved to Tennessee, they said, oh, it'll quit raining in May, and everything will dry up, and it won't rain again until fall comes around. That didn't happen this year. But that is a variable schedule. Ratio, fixed ratio, means you do something so much and something happens. We know that it takes 3,500 calories to make or break a pound. So I know that after I restrict 3,500 calories, I will lose a pound. Now, that may take me 3 days, may take me 3 weeks, but I'm not going to lose that pound until that happens. So that's a fixed ratio. You have to lose 3,500 calories before losing that pound, but it doesn't matter how long it takes you. Now, variable ratio, this is the one that gets the most action, because it means your boss is coming by, imagine, with money. And sometimes you have done the activity 3 times, and it gives you money. Sometimes you've done it 33 times, and it gives you money. You don't know how many times it's going to take to get money. So let's think about it in terms of chores, because this is where I see parents, including myself, fall down. We get frustrated because our kids don't do the chores effectively, but then I ask them, okay, every single time Junior fails to do that correctly, do you correct it? And a lot of times I hear, no, a lot of times it's just easier to do it myself. Oh, well, we've just rewarded Junior not doing his behavior. He's like, yeah, 9 times out of 10, Mom will think it's just easier to do it herself. So, and the 10th time, she'll yell a little bit, but it's no big deal. Okay, consistency. So what the child or the organism figures out is if I want to get away with something and it's not being punished or corrected every time, then I have to weigh the effort. Drinking is another example. I call it my cockroach theory, because you know how when you see one cockroach, you know there's like 500 others somewhere in the room, and gives me the heebie-jeebies. But every time somebody gets caught for a DUI, does that mean that's the one and only time that they've ever driven under the influence? 99 times out of 10, no. Just means it's the only time they've gotten caught. So it's variable ratio. They know they can drink, and 4 out of 5 times they're not going to get caught. Or worse, 49 out of 50 times they're not going to get caught. The 50th time they get caught. So when they get caught, this punishment that happens, is it worth it to get away with it 49 other times? It's a decision the person has to make on their own. Discriminative stimulant, my favorite things in the world. A lot of times in substance abuse treatment, we refer to these as triggers. People, places, things. There are a lot of different things that can trigger a behavior. We talked earlier about smoking, and we'll go back to it in a minute, so I'm not going to ruin a whole lot of it. Let's take depression. We're coming up on this holiday season, and that's a trigger for a lot of people. It's a huge trigger for a lot of people because the holidays are times that remind them that they don't have the family they wished they had, or they don't have the money that they want to have to buy presents, or they don't have fill in the blank. So time of year is a trigger. Things they see when they walk into the store, and over time it's gone from seasonal displays to in August, they just put out every season. It's like you have Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and maybe even New Year's already on display, and you can start getting your decorations for everything. But seeing some of those things may trigger depression. If you had a loved one that got injured or left you or passed away on a holiday, that may trigger depression. Being around certain people, being in certain places, doing certain things, smells. One of our strongest memory triggers is smell. So if people smell certain smells, it may trigger an emotion, which may trigger a behavior to make that unpleasant emotion go away. I'm huge about that at my house. I have essential oils, and I'm kind of a junkie when I go to the store, and I have to buy 5 or 6 different scented cleaners because it just depends on my mood. Sometimes I want cinnamon, sometimes I want apple, sometimes I want lavender. It's my mood. And I know that. And I know that certain smells tend to produce certain reactions. Why do you think they have lavender and chamomile baby shampoo everywhere? I think in a lot of ways it's more because it calms the parents that are holding the crying baby. But again, I digress. So discriminative stimuli for Polly. When she was put in that Skinner box, she didn't get fed when she was not in the Skinner box. So she was back in the lab room. When she got put into the Skinner box, which is where she stayed while we were working with her, she got fed. She's like, hoorah, it's mealtime. When she heard the food pellet drop down into the little food well, that was another discriminative stimuli. She said, oh, food, I'm there. As we progressed, she'd eat, and then she'd look around like, I'm a bird. Is there any way I can fly out of here? and we would tap on the glass. Not hard, not enough to scare her, but enough to get her attention. And she started to turn. And we're like, there you go. Now, of course, the first few times she did it, she didn't turn and put her right wing in. Of course, it was the left wing. But we were like, okay, that's a start. And we kept tapping until she'd turn and put her right wing in, or at least her right birdie shoulder. So you want to set discriminative stimuli. When you wake up in the morning, if the first thing you do is have a smoke and you want to stop smoking, you need to put something in your way that's going to remind you that, hey, wake up, you don't want to smoke. Because sometimes the things we do is just automatic. Have you ever driven from work to home and you were thinking about your day and you just don't even really remember being in the car? That's not good, by the way, but it happens. So you were on autopilot. Your brain kind of knew where you were supposed to go out of habit. Other things that can trigger smoking, the smell of it. Somebody walks into your office and they just come in from smoking, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to follow them. Certain times of day, certain emotions. There are a lot of different things. Billboards, oh my gosh. Ads on TV. I don't think there's cigarette ads anymore. I don't pay attention. That's the wonderful thing about having a Roku. You don't have to watch commercials. But we're going to talk about anxiety in the activity and cleaning the kitchen. For children, you wouldn't do this for an adult because it's seen as sort of patronizing. But we have a chore list in every room of exactly what it means if this room is clean. And I've had to work a little bit on that at being somewhat more flexible. But in the kitchen, for example, the counters have to be wiped down so there's no food left on them. That was a change I had to make, because wiping down, the first time they went through, they wiped it down, they're like, okay, I'm done. And there's still flour and little food particles, and I'm like, no, not so much. But that was my fault, because I wasn't specific about what it meant to wipe down a counter. If you've got a roommate, it may be the same sort of thing. If you ask them to clean the kitchen, and they're like, I put all the dishes in the dishwasher. Well, there's more to it than that, honey. Define what it means. For me, another one of my little idiosyncrasies is the floor. When you mop the floor, you need to get down on your hands and knees with a little towel and get all the gook out of the corners. It drives me crazy to see gook in corners. I'd rather see a big old splatter in the middle of the floor than see gook in corners. I don't know why. I know that's my idiosyncrasy, and that's not something that everybody thinks about, but it's something that's important if you're going to clean the kitchen in my house. So we needed to define that. Other discriminative stimuli besides putting up notes would be if you want to lose weight. A lot of people will take an outfit that maybe they used to fit into. I still have the jeans that I wore before I got pregnant with my first child. One of these days I'll fit back into them. Not. But that aside, you can put a picture of yourself up there, either of what you look like now because you want to lose some weight and remind yourself, or what you used to look like, or an outfit you want to wear, or maybe you have a big gala you're going to, your high school reunion. You can put the invitation on the refrigerator. That'll remind you, do I really want to eat right now? You can have a food diary if you force yourself to write in a food diary. And I'm off from cleaning the kitchen, obviously. Anything that will stop that behavior and make you think. So what are some discriminative stimuli for your client being less anxious? If you have a client that's just as nervous as a little chihuahua, how can you help them create an environment that says calm? With some of our clients, pretty clean, nice smelling house, person after my own heart. Clutter, and I think I say this every week, what your outside looks like reflects what's going on the inside. So if your house looks like somebody came in and a tornado went through it, that probably tells me that you're feeling very scattered and unfocused. So having a house that's clean and organized and smelling good. Let's trigger some of those happy memories. Having a schedule to follow. If you are somebody who's a schedule that you keep, yes. If you're one of those people who is very structured, it's very calming to have a schedule to follow. If you're one of those people who gets bored to death if you follow a really structured schedule, just make to-do lists. I know I need to get these 6 things done this week, and then everything will be okay. The sky will not fall as long as I get these 6 things done. Redefining what's causing their anxiety. Very true. Let's look at what's causing your anxiety right now. You're worried. One of mine. I'll be driving, and I have an older car, and it's broken down a couple of times. So now when I'm driving and it sputters, or maybe the car next to me is making some weird smell, and I'm like, is that my car? Is it going to break down? Is that rational? No. What are you worried about? The car breaking down. Okay. If the car breaks down, what are you going to do? Pull off to the side of the road, get out of traffic, call AAA, make a plan, make a list. So redefining exactly what it is that's causing them anxiety, why it's a threat, and what they can do to deal with that threat. Diaphragmatic breathing. Slow your breathing down. When we get stressed out, we tend to do shallow chest breathing and fast. So slow your breathing down through your belly. Recall pleasant memories. Go to your happy place, whatever it takes. Those are all ways that you can help people reduce their anxiety. Focusing on a higher power. Some people will have, I used to have a pendant that I wore that was a crucifix. And you could always tell when I was getting stressed because I would hold that thing and move it back and forth. Give them something to remind them to focus on their higher power. I had a colleague who used to get stressed out before she would have to go do groups, and especially if they were big groups. She was great with therapy, but she hated doing family ed because there were like 50 people. But she had a saying on the back of her door that it was the Serenity Prayer, for those of you who are familiar. And she'd read that, and she'd breathe, and she'd just ask her higher power for the words to get through this next family group. And she always did fabulously. But that didn't allay her anxiety necessarily. So we also, in that particular situation, if it was a patient, you could say, let's chart every time you do presentations and how many times, whether they go well or they go poorly. And then you can go back and look at that and say, 9 out of 10 times they go really, really well. So I'm wondering why you're focusing on this one time that the teleprompter went out and you forgot everything. Leaving the office. If the office is stressing you out, just remove yourself from the situation for a little while. Catch your breath. I know more than once I've gone out, walked outside, and gone on a walk around the building and mumbled to myself the whole way probably, but getting away from all the input so you can clear your head and let that adrenaline go down. Okay, I need to move on. I appreciate all your responses though. Oh, nice calls from friends. That's another one. Keep happy notes on your desk. Any nice cards you get from your friends or in your desk if you're not allowed to keep anything on your desk. Keep several good people in your speed dial so you can call them if you're stressed out and you just want to, vent for a second. So behavior strain occurs when the costs outweigh the benefits. There's too long between rewards, or the reward is insufficient. If I take my children, this is 2013, and I say, if you do your chores all week, I'll give you $0.25. They look at me and laugh, and if I'm not careful, turn around and walk the other way. That reward is not, 25 cents is not worth all the effort of doing chores, especially to them. So you need to find what's rewarding to that particular person. For my daughter, sometimes I might say, if you do your chores all week, then on Sunday after church we'll have a mommy and me day. That's great. That usually keeps her pretty darn motivated, and she reminds me 2 or 3 times a day all week long. So find what's rewarding for that person, and it has to be a sufficiently rewarding reward to do it. If you do your chores all week, I'll take you out for ice cream, probably not going to work for a lot of people. If you do your chores today and eat your vegetables, then we can go out for ice cream tonight. That might work because it's less effort to get through one day, so the reward doesn't have to be as magnificent. There are token economies. There are all kinds of things that you can use to build time between rewards. But my suggestion is make sure that you give the client or yourself enough reward and frequently enough to start out with. Do it really frequently to start out with. Sometimes when we're working with people in recovery, we talk about hours. How are you going to get through the next hour without having a drink? How are you going to get through the next 4 hours? Then maybe the next day. Don't set them up to fail. Increases in frequency or intensity of behavior in order to receive a reward. I put the little prompt there to remind myself, computer clicking, and I think most of us have done this, except for my husband, of course, because he's patient. He's a computer dude. But I will click on something, and it will not open. I'm like, it's supposed to open. I'll click on it again, and it still doesn't open. And I click on it again and again and again and again because I'm going through an extinction burst. The reward's not coming. I was supposed to do it. I was supposed to get a reward. It was a 1-to-1 ratio. And it's not coming, so I'm going to click, 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 click. And then we all know what happens. After a couple of minutes and the computer freezes and says it stopped responding, then like 17 of the same windows open up. And you're like, oh, guess it was still thinking. Oops. It's most common in ratio-based schedules to see an extinction burst. So if you normally get a reward every 1 to 5 times you do something, then when you get to the 8th or 9th time and a reward hasn't been present, then you might start going, okay, what's going on here? A lot of times we start acting out more. Now let's think about little Johnny. He's in the grocery store, and he says, I want some candy. And Mom says, no. We're going to go home and have dinner. No candy. And he says, I want candy. And Mom says, shh, shh, shh. Okay, you can have candy, just don't make a scene. The next time they go into the store, they go through the same thing, but she doesn't give in at the loud voice. She says, no, I told you we're not doing this again. I want candy. No, you're not going to have it. And he progresses to throwing a complete hissy temper tantrum, blue in the face, screaming, crying, whatever he does. Now, if Mom gives in there, then she's saying, you have to do this behavior 4 times. You have to ask progressively loudly 4 times before I'll give in. At a certain point, if she holds her ground, he's going to be like, screw it. I guess she's not going to give in today. Hallelujah. The person will intensify the behavior until the costs, the screaming, throwing a tantrum, all the energy and effort outweigh the benefits. And then they're like, it ain't worth it for a Hershey bar. So let's move on to a more pro-social thing. Shaping, rewarding successive approximations of a behavior. You have a client who wants to stop smoking. Okay, great. Right now they're smoking about 2 packs a day, and they want to stop. But they don't want to go cold turkey. So, okay, fine. I don't exactly know where that term cold turkey came from, but I'm digressing again. Rewarding successive approximations. So we say, all right, what do you think you can cut down to in one day? A pack and a half? Can we try that for a week? Again, we want to do something that is observable, measurable, and attainable. So you might even have him do it on a daily basis. Can you do try to do a pack and a half each day, or less, of course. And keep a chart so we see how many cigarettes you smoked. If he does it, great, there's a reward. The next week he comes back and you say, all right, we're going to make it a little tougher. Now you can only smoke 1 pack a day. So you're really going to have to choose how you space out those cigarettes. Now in reality, there's a whole lot of other stuff that is enticing Jim Bob to want to smoke. So if we don't address that in therapy, we're setting him up for failure. We need to look at why he smokes and what he could do differently and provide him some alternatives. But as far as shaping is going, we're looking at the behavior and the frequency, intensity, or duration. So we talked earlier about Polly. First she started out by putting her left wing in. And we're like, no, not so much. And then she got frustrated because we weren't giving her food, so she had a little extinction burst. And eventually she put her right wing in. And we're like, score! So we gave her some food. And birds are smarter than you would think when they're really hungry. And she was like, oh. And it took a little bit, but eventually she figured out she put her right wing shoulder in, she would get a treat. Then we said, all right, you put your right wing shoulder in, but you're not getting a treat for that anymore. We're going to up the ante, and you need to flap your wing. Or, no, take her wing out. That was it. You know, see, I can't even do the hokey pokey anymore. And again, we withheld the food until she got irritable, and she started going through an extinction burst and moving around, and eventually she put her right shoulder in and took her right shoulder out. And we're like, food. With small children and animals, the reward has to be almost instantaneous. With older people and older children, you can say, if you do it for an entire day, if you have a good day at school, there's a reward available. If you tell that to an 18-month-old, he or she's going to look at you like you lost your mind. You're just like, wah, 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 wah. Ice cream, wah, wah, wah. So, moving on. Anxiety. Successive approximations of not being anxious. Okay, so when you get anxious, you start breathing really rapidly and you get dizzy. And this happens 6 times a day. All right, so we can either work on the intensity, so they're not hyperventilating to the point of dizziness, or the frequency. Let's see if we can cut down the times that you react this way. Again, you've got to look at what's causing the anxiety and provide reasonable alternatives, but give them something measurable. Maybe if they can go from 5 episodes a day to 4, or 4 plus 1 that wasn't quite so bad. Chart it. Talk about it next week. Cleaning the kitchen. Again, and I'm picking up my pace here because I know we're running short on time. Cleaning the kitchen. They come in, they do their thing, and if it appears that there was a good effort, a reward can be provided. But then you've got to have a talk about next time, in order to get the reward, you have to do this a little bit better. And with children, and even sometimes employees, you just put it a bit of a different way if you're talking to an adult. Before they go in to do the task again, prompt them. Say, don't forget to wipe out the gook in the corners on the floor. Wipe down the counter until it's shiny, and make sure the sink is wiped out and the dishes are put in the dishwasher. Whatever it is. With an employee, same thing. Make sure that you check for the treatment plan updates, the assessment, the progress notes, and the releases of information. Chaining. We're almost to the end. Bill Engvall talks about quitting smoking, and he says, you know what? If I quit smoking, I'm going to kill you. Then I'm going to go to prison where I'm going to need cigarettes as currency. That's a chained behavior. One behavior leads to the other behavior, leads to the other behavior. For a lot of our clients, and if you do dialectical behavior therapy, you're familiar with this term. They don't just wake up in the morning and all of a sudden they get anxious about everything. There's a whole chain of events that goes there. And one of the things that we talk about in DBT is vulnerabilities. If you didn't get enough sleep, or you're feeling sick, that may make you a little bit more irritable, which may make you predisposed to getting stressed out over things you wouldn't normally get stressed out over, which makes you predisposed to having a stress overreaction. So you want to look at how they got from point A, being calm, cool, and collected, to point B, doing whatever behavior it is that they're trying to stop doing. We want to look at how one behavior leads to another, because you can put interventions in there. If they don't get enough sleep, and they go to work, and they know that they're irritable, one of the first things I would tell my staff is, the baby was up all night. I am going to be a little bit testy today. I apologize in advance. I'm going to have my door shut because I don't want to bite anybody's head off. And, so that eliminated a lot of the input, so I was able to get through the day without having an irritability reaction. So smoking, for example, we look at what places, times, activities, smells, taste, touch, and emotions may produce thoughts of smoking. The thoughts of smoking lead to the smoking itself. So we can either change places, times, activities, sensory, or emotions, or we can change the reaction to those things, or we can put something in. When you have a thought of smoking, you need to call your sponsor, snap a rubber band on your wrist, whatever it is that works for that person, to say, no, I don't want to take that next step. And people spend, there's entire degrees on behavior modification, so if some of this is still a little fuzzy, don't feel bad, which is why we're going to do more segments on it and really break it down into identifying reinforcers, identifying discriminative stimuli. So you can feel confident when you work with a client at identifying, well, it looks like this person should have a great relapse prevention plan. I wonder why they're still relapsing. So in summary, changing behavior requires adequately defining the behavior, understanding and addressing the reinforcers that maintain it. They're doing it for a reason. We need to figure out why. Identifying and dealing with discriminative stimuli triggering it, and understanding and addressing the negative consequences of the change. Guess what? It's not fun to change. Quitting smoking, doing more chores, doing the hokey pokey, whatever it is. We need to address the reasons why the person might not want to change. Fabulous, 15 seconds to go. For all who participated in the course polls and entered their email address, you will receive an email with directions for how to get your CEUs if you want to purchase CEUs. And on that note, have a fabulous weekend. Bye.